The dust cloud on the horizon looked like death coming to collect what remained of Laura Ashford's dignity. And she stood on the porch of her ranch house with her rifle across her chest, ready to tell another land buyer exactly where he could shove his offer. 3 months had passed since influenza had stolen James from her bed in the middle of a February night, leaving her with 2,000 acres of New Mexico grassland, a herd of cattle she barely knew how to manage, and enough debt to drown in. The ranch sat 10 miles outside Santa Rosa, where the Pecos River cut through the high plains like a promise that water could exist even in this harsh country. And every businessman in Guadalupe County seemed to think a 24-year-old widow had no business trying to run it alone. Laura pushed a strand of dark hair behind her ear and watched the rider approach. Her late husband had built this ranch from nothing over 8 years, starting with 100 head of cattle and a dream bigger than the endless sky. She had stood beside him through droughts and hard winters, learned to cook for ranch hands, kept the books, and nursed sick calves in their kitchen. The mortgage holder in town, a snake-eyed man named Garrison, had already sent 2 letters suggesting she sell before the bank took it all anyway. The neighboring rancher, Thomas Brennan, had made 3 separate offers, each one lower than the last, as if her desperation was a commodity he could wait to purchase at bargain prices. The rider came into focus as he drew closer. He sat tall in the saddle on a roan horse that moved with the easy gait of an animal well-trained and well-treated. The man wore a dusty brown hat, leather chaps, and a blue shirt faded almost white by sun and washing. As he approached the fence line, he removed his hat, revealing sandy hair and a face weathered by outdoor work but not yet hardened by too many years. She guessed he was perhaps 27 or 28. "Madam," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "I'm looking for the Ashford ranch. Am I in the right place?" Laura kept the rifle visible but lowered it slightly. "You found it. State your business." The man dismounted with fluid grace and looped his horse's reins over the fence post. "Name's Austin Zimmerman. I heard in town you might be looking for a ranch foreman." That caught her off guard. Laura frowned. "Who told you that?" The store owner, Mrs. Chen. "I was asking about work in the area and she mentioned you might need help." Austin stayed on the far side of the fence, respectful of the boundary. "I've been working cattle since I was 12. Spent the last 6 years on a big operation up in Colorado, but I'm looking to settle somewhere warmer. I can handle everything from branding to breeding, breaking horses to mending fence. I can show you references if you need them." "I'm not looking for a foreman," Laura said flatly. "I can't afford one." Austin nodded slowly, turning his hat in his hands. "Mrs. Chen mentioned you might say that. She also mentioned the bank's been circling, and that other rancher's been making offers." "Mrs. Chen talks too much," Laura said, but there was no real heat in it. The Chinese woman who ran the general store had been kind to Laura since James died, extending credit when she needed it and never pushing for payment before Laura was ready. "Maybe so," Austin agreed. "But she also said you were the most stubborn woman in 3 counties, and that you'd rather lose everything than give up what your husband built." He met her eyes directly. "That's the kind of person worth working for." Laura studied him carefully. He had an honest face, with gray eyes that didn't flinch from her scrutiny. His clothes were worn but clean, his boots scuffed but well-maintained. Everything about him spoke of a man who worked hard and took care of what he had. But that didn't change her financial reality. "Like I said, I can't afford to hire anyone. I've got 3 ranch hands left, and I can barely make their wages as it is. My husband employed 8 men at full strength." Austin put his hat back on and leaned against the fence post. "What if we made a different arrangement?" "What kind of arrangement?" I work as foreman, full duties. Managing the hands, overseeing the cattle operation, breeding program, all of it. In exchange, you provide food and lodging, and I get a percentage of the profits when you sell cattle. If there's no profit, I get nothing beyond my keep." Laura shook her head. "That's a fool's bargain. You could work a whole year and end up with nothing." "Could be," Austin admitted. "But I'm betting on you, Mrs. Ashford. I saw your cattle on the way in. The herd's in decent shape considering you've been managing without a foreman for 3 months. The fences need work and the south pastures overgrazed, but nothing that can't be fixed. You've got good water and good grass. With proper management, this ranch could turn a profit. And if it doesn't, if the bank forecloses before we even get to a cattle sale," Austin shrugged, "then I'll have lost a gamble. Won't be the first time, but at least I'll have had decent food and a roof over my head while I tried." Laura wanted to say no. Taking on a stranger, letting him live on her property, trusting him with decisions about her cattle and her land, it felt like giving away a piece of what she and James had built together. But she also knew the truth. The 3 hands she had left were good men, loyal to James's memory, but none of them had the experience to run an operation this size. Juan Morales was the oldest at 52, a capable cowhand but not a leader. The other 2, Billy Thompson and Sam Cortez, were barely 20 and still learning the trade. She was drowning, and this stranger was offering her a rope. The question was whether that rope would pull her to safety or just drag them both under. "References," she said finally. "I want to see your references, and I'll want to send a telegram to verify them." Austin's face broke into a smile that transformed it entirely, erasing years of weathering and revealing a warmth that caught Laura completely by surprise. "Yes, madam. I've got letters in my saddlebag." She gestured toward the house. "Bring your horse up. There's water in the trough by the barn. I'll make coffee and we can talk properly." As Austin led his roan through the gate, Laura felt something shift inside her chest. Not quite hope, but maybe the distant cousin of it. The possibility that she might not have to face everything alone. Inside the ranch house, Laura set about making coffee while Austin sat at the kitchen table and produced 3 letters from his saddlebag. The kitchen was clean but sparse, showing signs of the economies she had been forced to make. The good china that had belonged to James's mother stayed packed away. The table held simple tin plates and cups. Austin glanced around with an appraising eye but made no comment. He simply laid out his letters and waited while Laura read them. The first was from a ranch owner in Colorado named Herbert Stone, praising Austin's skill with horses and his steady hand with the men under his supervision. The second came from a cattle buyer who had worked with Austin on 3 separate drives, commending his ability to get herds to market in good condition. The third was from a town sheriff, attesting to Austin's character and honesty. "The Colorado ranch," Laura said, setting down the letters. "Why did you leave? This letter makes it sound like they valued you highly." Austin accepted the cup of coffee she offered. "Mr. Stone wanted to retire and sell to his son. The son and I didn't see eye to eye on how to run things. He preferred shortcuts and cutting corners. I prefer doing things right. It became clear there wasn't room for both of us, so I moved on." "When was this?" 2 months ago. "I've been working my way south since then, picking up short jobs here and there. Nothing that felt worth staying for until I heard about your situation." Laura sat across from him, wrapping her hands around her own coffee cup. "What exactly did you hear about my situation? That your husband died of influenza in February. That you've been trying to run the ranch yourself, but you're fighting debt and drought and every vulture in the county trying to pick the bones. That you're too proud to ask for help and too stubborn to quit." He took a sip of coffee. "Mrs. Chen made it sound like you were one strong wind away from losing everything. Mrs. Chen wasn't wrong, Laura admitted. She found herself talking more freely than she had since James died, perhaps because this stranger had no stake in her pride. The mortgage payment is due in 6 weeks. I've got enough to cover it, barely, but only if nothing goes wrong. If I lose cattle to disease or predators, if the creek dries up, if any one of a dozen things goes bad, I won't make it. And even if I make this payment, there's another 6 months after that, and another 6 months after that. James had a plan to clear the debt in 5 years. I'm trying to follow it, but I'm missing pieces. He knew things about running this place that he never had time to teach me. Austin listened without interrupting. When she finished, he set down his cup and leaned forward. Here's what I can offer. I can teach you everything your husband didn't have time to. Managing the breeding program, reading the grass to prevent overgrazing, timing the sales to get the best prices. I'll run the day-to-day operations, but I'll explain every decision I make so you understand why. This is your ranch, Mrs. Ashford. I'm not interested in taking it from you or making you a stranger on your own land. I'm interested in making it work. Why? Laura asked bluntly. Why invest yourself in a failing ranch when you could hire on somewhere established and draw a steady wage? Austin was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. My father was a sharecropper in Kansas, worked land that would never belong to him, broke his back making other men rich, and died at 45 with nothing to show for it but a crooked spine and calloused hands. I swore I'd never do that. I've been saving money, planning to buy my own place someday. But land is expensive and good land is more expensive. Your ranch, if we can save it, if we can turn a profit, maybe you'd consider selling me a stake in it eventually. A partnership. That's what I'm gambling on. Not wages, but the chance to own something. It was the most honest answer Laura could have imagined, and it disarmed her completely. This man wasn't offering charity or trying to take advantage. He was proposing a gamble that risked them both and could benefit them both. All right, she said, surprised by her own decisiveness. We'll try it for a month. You'll work as foreman, manage the hands, and start whatever repairs and changes you think necessary. I'll provide room and board. At the end of the month, we'll assess where we stand and decide if we continue with the profit-sharing arrangement. If either of us wants to end it, no hard feelings. Austin extended his hand across the table. That's a fair deal, Mrs. Ashford. She shook his hand, noting the callous strength of it and the firmness of his grip. Call me Laura. If we're going to work together, we can skip the formalities. Laura, he said, testing the name, and I'm Austin. She showed him to the foreman's cabin, a small structure near the barn that had stood empty since James died. The previous foreman had left 2 years ago to start his own spread in Texas, and James had been managing without one, relying on Juan's experience to fill the gap. The cabin was dusty but sound, with a bed, a stove, a table, and a chair. Basic but functional. I'll bring you blankets and some supplies, Laura said. We eat dinner at 6. I cook for all the hands, so you'll meet the others then. Austin dropped his saddlebag on the table and looked around the cabin with evident satisfaction. This is fine. Better than some line shacks I've stayed in. Laura left him to settle in and returned to the main house, her mind churning. She had just given a complete stranger authority over her entire operation based on 3 letters and her gut instinct. James would have thought her insane, or maybe he wouldn't have. James had always said she had good instincts about people. That evening, she rang the dinner bell, and the ranch hands came in from their various tasks. Juan, Billy, and Sam filed into the kitchen, removing their hats and washing up at the basin by the door. They stopped short when they saw Austin sitting at the table. Boys, Laura said, ladling stew into bowls. "This is Austin Zimmerman. He's signed on as foreman. He'll be directing the work around here starting tomorrow." Juan's weathered face remained neutral, but his dark eyes studied Austin carefully. "We have not had a foreman since Mr. James passed." "I know," Laura said, "but we need one now. Austin comes with strong references and solid experience. I expect you all to work with him." Billy, a gangly young man with red hair and freckles, looked uncertain. "No disrespect, madam, but can we afford a foreman?" "We can't afford not to have one," Laura said firmly. "Now sit down and eat." The meal was quiet and slightly awkward as the men sized each other up. Austin didn't push, didn't try to assert dominance or win them over with charm. He simply ate his stew, complimented Laura's cooking, and asked practical questions about the ranch layout and the current state of the herd. Juan eventually warmed enough to provide detailed answers. "We have about 400 head right now, scattered across the northern and eastern pastures. The southern pasture is too dry. We moved the cattle off it 3 weeks ago. The breeding stock, the bulls and the best heifers, they are kept closer to the house in the near pasture." Austin nodded. "Water situation. The creek is still running but lower than usual for this time of year. We have been careful not to let the cattle overgraze near the water source." "Good thinking," Austin said. "Tomorrow I'd like to ride out and see the full spread, get a sense of the property." "Juan, would you be willing to show me around?" Juan glanced at Laura, who nodded. "See, I can do this." The rest of the meal passed more easily. By the time the men left, Laura felt cautiously optimistic that her gamble might pay off. Austin hadn't tried to swagger or command. He had shown respect for the men already there and deferred to their knowledge while establishing that he would be taking charge. It was a delicate balance, and he had managed it well. After the hands left, Austin lingered, helping Laura clear the plates despite her protests. "You don't have to do that," she said. "You're not hired help for the house." "I know," Austin replied, stacking bowls by the basin, "but my mother would tan my hide if she knew I sat while a woman cleaned up alone. Besides, we're partners in this venture. That means we both do what needs doing." Laura found herself smiling, the first genuine smile she had felt in months. "Your mother raised you right." "She tried," Austin said. "She passed when I was 16, but she made sure I knew how to cook, clean, and mend my own clothes before she went. Said no son of hers would be helpless." "I'm sorry for your loss," Laura said quietly. "Thank you. It's been 12 years, but I still miss her." He met Laura's eyes. "I'm sorry about your husband. Mrs. Chen said you two were happy together." Laura nodded, not trusting her voice for a moment. She and James had been happy. Not in some wild, passionate way, but in the steady, comfortable way of two people who worked well together and built something meaningful. She missed him with an ache that never quite faded. "We were," she managed. "He was a good man. He didn't deserve to die so young." Austin didn't offer platitudes or empty comfort. He simply nodded and finished drying the last plate. "I'll let you get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." After he left, Laura sat alone in the kitchen and let herself cry, something she rarely allowed. The tears came not just from grief, but from the overwhelming relief of not being entirely alone anymore. She had been carrying the weight of the ranch by herself for so long that she had forgotten how heavy it was until someone offered to help bear it. The next morning, Austin rose before dawn and was already checking the horses when Laura came out to start breakfast. She watched him from the kitchen window as he moved through the barn, his movements efficient and knowledgeable. He checked each horse's hooves, ran his hands along their legs checking for heat or swelling, and made notes in a small book he carried in his shirt pocket. When the men gathered for breakfast, Austin laid out his plan for the day. He would ride the property with Juan, assessing the fences, water sources, and grazing conditions. Billy and Sam would start repairing the south fence line, which Juan reported was in poor shape. "That fence has needed work for 2 months," Juan admitted. "We have not had the time to get to it." "Well, we'll make the time now," Austin said. "A good fence is everything in cattle country. Can't manage your herd if they can wander off whenever they please." The men rode out, and Laura turned to her own work. She had her own set of tasks, the endless labor of running a household and managing the ranch's finances. She spent the morning in James's office, poring over the books and trying to find ways to stretch their dwindling resources. Austin and Juan returned at midday, and Austin sought Laura out in the office. He knocked on the door frame, waiting for her invitation before entering. "How does it look?" Laura asked, setting down her pencil. Austin pulled up a chair and opened his notebook. "Better than I expected in some ways, worse in others. The land is good, the water situation is manageable if we're smart about it, and your cattle are healthy. But the infrastructure is falling apart. Fences are down in a dozen places. The windmill that pumps water to the far pasture isn't working, and the line shack on the eastern section has a roof that's about to cave in." Laura rubbed her temples. "I knew about the fences. I didn't know about the windmill or the line shack." "It's too much for 3 men to keep up with," Austin said gently. "No criticism of them or you, it's just a fact. This ranch needs at least 6 hands to run properly, and you've been making do with 3. I can't afford 6 hands. I know, but here's what I'm thinking." Austin flipped through his notes. "We focus on the critical repairs first, fences and the windmill. Those directly affect the herd. The line shack can wait. I can do most of the windmill repair myself if I can get the parts. For the fences, we'll need wire and posts, but if we work hard, the 4 of us can get it done in 2 weeks. How much will the materials cost?" Austin showed her his calculations. The number made Laura wince, but it was manageable. "Barely." "Do it," she said. "But keep looking for ways to save money. We're running too close to the edge for comfort." "Understood." Austin stood but hesitated at the door. "Laura, I looked at your books this morning. You left them on the kitchen table. I hope you don't mind." She did mind a little, but she kept her voice level. "What did you see? You're better at this than you think. Your accounting is accurate, and you've made good decisions about which debts to pay first, but you're selling your cattle at the wrong time. You've been selling in winter when prices are low because you need the cash. If you can hold out until fall when the buyers are preparing for winter feeding, you'll get 30% more per head." Laura shook her head. "I can't wait until fall. The mortgage payment is due in 6 weeks. What if we sold some of the breeding stock now instead of market cattle? You could get more per animal, and we could rebuild the breeding program later when we're on steadier ground." It went against everything James had taught her about maintaining the quality of the herd, but Austin had a point. "Which animals would we sell?" "I'd need to look at them more carefully, but my initial thought is we keep your 2 best bulls and your top 10 heifers. We sell the rest of the breeding stock and use that money to get through the summer. Come fall, we sell market cattle at the better prices and use that to make the next mortgage payment and start rebuilding." It was risky. If anything happened to the remaining breeding stock, it would take years to recover. But if they didn't make the mortgage payment, there would be no ranch left to recover. "Let me think about it," Laura said. "Take your time. We've got a few weeks to decide." Over the next 2 weeks, Laura watched Austin transform the ranch. He worked harder than any foreman she had ever seen, often putting in longer hours than the regular hands. He repaired fences alongside Billy and Sam, teaching them techniques for making the repairs last longer. He spent 2 full days fixing the windmill, coming back to the house each evening covered in grease but satisfied. He reorganized the barn, culled the tack that was beyond repair, and set up a system for maintaining what remained. But more than the physical work, Laura noticed the way he taught. Every task became a lesson. When he worked on the windmill, he explained to Billy exactly what he was doing and why. When he made decisions about which pasture to use for grazing, he walked Laura through his reasoning. He wasn't just running the ranch. He was making sure everyone around him understood how to run it. Laura found herself seeking him out in the evenings, ostensibly to discuss ranch business but increasingly just to talk. Austin had a way of listening that made her feel heard. He asked questions about James, about how they had met and built the ranch together, and he seemed genuinely interested in the answers. He didn't try to replace James or make her forget him. He simply acknowledged that James had existed and mattered. One evening, about 3 weeks after Austin's arrival, they sat on the porch after dinner watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The day's work was done. The hands had retired to the bunkhouse, and a rare, cool breeze made the heat bearable. "I've been thinking about your suggestion," Laura said, "about selling the breeding stock." Austin rocked slowly in his chair, waiting. "It makes sense," she continued. "It goes against my instincts, but my instincts have been shaped by having James here to handle the long-term planning. Right now, I need short-term survival." "If it helps," Austin said, "I think your husband would approve. He built this ranch, but he built it for you. He wouldn't want you to lose it because you were too rigid to adapt." Laura smiled sadly. "You didn't know him. How can you be sure?" "Because any man who married you and built a life with you would have been smart enough to value practical thinking over pride." The compliment, delivered so matter-of-factly, made Laura's cheeks warm. She glanced at Austin, but he was looking out at the sunset, apparently unaware of the effect his words had on her. "We'll do it then," she said. "We'll sell the excess breeding stock and keep the best. You choose which animals to keep. You have a better eye for it than I do." Austin nodded. "I'll make the selections tomorrow, and we can drive them to market next week." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Laura realized with some surprise that she had grown accustomed to his presence. The ranch felt less empty with him there, not because he filled it with noise or demanded attention, but because he belonged. He had slipped into the rhythms of the place as if he had always been there. "Can I ask you something?" Laura said. "Of course." "That first day when you rode up, you said you'd heard I was too stubborn to quit. Did that really make you want to work here, or were you just saying what you thought I wanted to hear?" Austin stopped rocking and turned to look at her directly. "I meant it. I've worked for plenty of people who gave up at the first sign of trouble. They talk big but fold when things get hard. You didn't fold. You lost your husband, took on debt you could barely manage, and faced down every person who told you to quit, all while keeping this place running. That's not just stubborn. That's strength. That's the kind of person I want to partner with." Laura met his gaze and saw nothing but sincerity there. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition that this partnership was becoming something more than a business arrangement. She wasn't ready to name it or examine it too closely, but she felt it. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for taking that gamble on me." "Thank you for letting me," Austin replied. The cattle drive to market was a success. Austin had chosen well, keeping the best breeding animals and selling the rest for prices that exceeded Laura's expectations. The money would cover the mortgage payment with some left over for supplies and emergency reserves. For the first time since James died, Laura felt like she could breathe without the immediate fear of drowning. The night after they returned from market, Laura cooked a celebratory dinner with beef from one of their own steers and the first fresh vegetables from the garden. The mood around the table was lighter than it had been in months. Even Juan, usually reserved, smiled and shared a story about a cattle drive he had been on 20 years ago. After dinner, Austin helped Laura clean up as had become his habit. They worked side by side in the kitchen, their movements synchronized by repetition. "We did it," Laura said, washing a plate. "We actually made the mortgage payment and lived to fight another day." "You did it," Austin corrected. "You held this place together until help arrived." "I just gave you a hand with the last bit. Don't downplay your role. Without you, I would have sold the wrong cattle at the wrong time and probably come up short anyway. You saved this ranch." Austin dried the plate and set it aside. "We saved it together. That's what partners do." Laura turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing in the small kitchen. She could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, the faint scar on his chin that she had never noticed before. "Austin," she began, not sure what she was going to say. He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers barely brushing her cheek. "Laura, I know it hasn't been long since your husband passed, and I know this isn't the right time. But I need you to know that working with you these past weeks, getting to know you, it's been more than just business for me." Laura's breath caught. She should step back, should maintain the professional distance that propriety demanded. James had been dead less than 6 months. People would talk. She should care about that. But standing in her kitchen with Austin's hand still hovering near her face, she found she didn't care what people would say. James was gone, and she was here, alive, and this man had brought something back into her life that she thought she had lost forever. Hope. Partnership, and something else, something warm and fluttering that she hadn't expected to feel again. "It's been more than business for me too," she admitted. Austin smiled, that transformative smile that made him look younger and lighter. "Good. That's good to know." He stepped back, giving her space. "But I also don't want to rush you or push for something you're not ready for. We can take this slow. We've got time." Laura appreciated that more than she could say. She wasn't ready for anything dramatic or public, but knowing that these feelings were mutual, that she wasn't alone in this unexpected attraction, it was enough for now. The summer progressed with hard work and careful management. Austin's leadership brought stability to the ranch operations. The fences were repaired. The cattle were rotated through pastures to prevent overgrazing, and the herd remained healthy despite the heat and the ever-present threat of drought. Billy and Sam grew more skilled under Austin's patient teaching, and Juan's initial reserve melted into genuine respect and even affection for the new foreman. Laura found herself falling into a routine that felt sustainable for the first time since James's death. She managed the household and the finances while Austin handled the cattle and the land. They consulted on every major decision, but increasingly, there was an easy give and take to their partnership. She trusted his judgment, and he valued her input. But it was in the quiet moments that their relationship deepened. Evening conversations on the porch became a nightly ritual. Austin would share stories from his years of ranch work, tales of difficult drives and ornery cattle that made Laura laugh until her sides hurt. She would tell him about her childhood in Santa Rosa, about meeting James at a church social when she was 18, about the early years of their marriage when they had been poor but happy. Austin never seemed jealous of James's memory. He listened to her stories with genuine interest and asked questions that showed he understood that James would always be a part of who Laura was. That generosity of spirit made Laura's feelings for Austin grow deeper. They were careful not to display any affection in front of the hands or when they went into town. Laura was aware of how quickly gossip could spread in a small community like Santa Rosa, and she had no desire to give people ammunition to use against her. A widow was expected to mourn for at least a year before even considering another man. The fact that she was developing feelings for Austin after only a few months would be considered scandalous. But in private, in stolen moments, they allowed themselves small intimacies. Austin's hand on her back as she passed him in the barn. Laura's fingers brushing his when she handed him his coffee in the morning, sitting close enough on the porch that their shoulders touched. Nothing dramatic, but each touch was a promise of something more when the time was right. In late July, a problem emerged that threatened everything they had built. Thomas Brennan, the neighboring rancher who had made offers on Laura's land, began driving his cattle across her property to reach water. The first time it happened, Laura assumed it was an accident, cattle breaking through a weak point in the fence. But when it happened 3 more times in 2 weeks, it became clear that it was deliberate. Austin rode out to confront Brennan after the 4th incident. He returned hours later, his jaw tight with anger. "Well," Laura asked, meeting him at the barn. "He claims the creek on his property is drying up and he has a right to water his cattle. I pointed out that he has no right to use your land without permission. He suggested that if you had sold to him like a sensible woman, it wouldn't be an issue." Laura's hands clenched into fists. "That bastard. He's trying to force my hand, make the ranch impossible to manage so I'll have to sell." "That's exactly what he's doing," Austin agreed. "And it's going to work if we don't stop it. His cattle are eating your grass and fouling your water. If this keeps up, you won't have enough resources for your own herd." "What can we do? The sheriff won't help. Brennan has him in his pocket." Austin thought for a moment, his brow furrowed. "We document everything. Every time his cattle cross onto your land, we record it with dates and numbers. We repair the fences and post them with legal notices. And we make it clear that if he continues, we'll take him to court." "I can't afford a lawyer," Laura said. "Neither can he. Not a good one. Most of his money is tied up in his ranch, same as yours. He's gambling that you won't fight back. So we call his bluff." Over the next week, they implemented Austin's plan. They repaired every inch of shared fence line between Laura's property and Brennan's. They posted legal notices warning against trespassing. Austin meticulously documented every incident of Brennan's cattle crossing the boundary, noting the date, time, number of animals, and the damage they caused. Juan, Billy, and Sam supported the effort wholeheartedly, taking turns riding the fence line and driving off Brennan's cattle whenever they appeared. It was exhausting work on top of their regular duties, but the men were loyal to Laura and angry at Brennan's underhanded tactics. The confrontation came on a sweltering August afternoon. Brennan himself rode onto Laura's property with 6 of his hands, deliberately driving a group of cattle across the border. Austin, who had been watching the fence line, rode out to meet them. Laura, spotting the group from the house, grabbed her rifle and followed. By the time she arrived, Austin and Brennan were facing each other, their horses nearly nose to nose. "This is private property, Brennan," Austin said, his voice level but hard. "Turn those cattle around and get off this land." Brennan, a thick-bodied man in his 50s with a weathered face and cold eyes, sneered. "I don't take orders from hired help. Where's the widow?" "Right here," Laura said, riding up with her rifle across her saddle. "And you heard my foreman." "Turn your cattle around." "Your cattle can share, Laura," Brennan said, his tone falsely friendly. "It's not Christian to deny water to dumb animals." "It's not Christian to steal your neighbor's resources either," Laura shot back. "You've got water on your own land if you'd manage it properly." "My land is not your backup plan." Brennan's face darkened. "You're making a mistake being difficult. I've been patient, but my patience is running thin." "Is that a threat?" Austin asked quietly. "It's a fact," Brennan said. "Winter's coming. Things happen in winter." Cattle get sick, fences come down, accidents occur. It would be a shame if the widow lost her herd to some misfortune that could have been avoided. Laura felt cold fury wash over her. Get off my land. Now. And if your cattle cross that fence again, I'll shoot them for trespassing. That's not a threat, Mr. Brennan. That's a promise. For a moment, the situation teetered on the edge of violence. Brennan's men shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward their guns. Austin remained perfectly still, but Laura could see the tension in his posture, the readiness to react. Then Juan appeared on the ridge behind them with Billy and Sam, all three men armed and clearly ready to back Laura's play. Brennan looked at the odds and apparently decided they weren't in his favor. You'll regret this, Laura. I've tried to be reasonable, but you're forcing my hand. I'll take my chances, Laura said coldly. Brennan wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following with the disputed cattle. Laura lowered her rifle, her hands shaking slightly with the adrenaline rush. Austin rode close and put his hand over hers on the rifle. You did good. You stood your ground. He's going to cause trouble, Laura said. Real trouble, you heard him. Maybe, but at least now he knows we won't roll over. Sometimes that's enough to make a bully back down. Juan rode up, his expression grim. That man is dangerous, Senora Laura. He is not someone who accepts no easily. I know, Laura said, but what choice do I have? If I give in to him, I lose everything anyway. At least this way I'm fighting. They returned to the ranch house, but the confrontation left Laura unsettled. That night, she found it hard to sleep, her mind churning with worry about what Brennan might do. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen to make tea. She was surprised to find a lamp burning in the foreman's cabin. Through the window, she could see Austin sitting at his small table, writing in his notebook. She debated for a moment, then wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and walked across the yard. She knocked softly on the cabin door. Austin opened it immediately, concern crossing his face when he saw her. Laura, what's wrong? I can't sleep, she admitted. I keep thinking about Brennan and what he might do. Austin stepped back to let her in. I can't sleep either. That's why I'm making lists of everything we need to watch for. Possible sabotage, ways he might come at us. Laura looked at his notebook, seeing pages filled with careful handwriting. This is what you've been doing instead of sleeping. I told you I'm invested in this ranch, Austin said. That means protecting it from threats. Laura felt a surge of affection so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. This man, who had known her for barely 3 months, was losing sleep to protect what she and James had built. He wasn't doing it for wages or even for the promise of future profit. He was doing it because he cared. About the ranch, yes, but also about her. Austin, she said softly. He looked up from his notebook, and whatever he saw in her face made him set down his pencil and stand. Laura closed the distance between them and reached up to touch his face. I know it hasn't been long enough. I know people will talk. I know all the reasons this is too soon. But I need you to know that I care about you. More than I should, probably. More than is sensible, but I do. Austin covered her hand with his own, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. I love you, Laura. I've been trying not to say it because I didn't want to pressure you, but it's the truth. I love you, and I will do everything in my power to protect you and this ranch. I love you too, Laura whispered. And then she was kissing him, or he was kissing her. She wasn't sure who moved first. All she knew was that his arms came around her, and she felt safe and wanted and alive in a way she hadn't felt in so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Austin rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this right, he said. I want to court you properly, marry you properly with everyone's blessing. But if you need time, I can wait. I'll wait as long as you need. Laura smiled, tears sliding down her cheeks. I don't want to wait. Life is too short and we've already wasted time dancing around this. But you're right that we need to be proper about it. Give it another few months until after we make the fall cattle sale and the next mortgage payment. Then we can announce our intentions publicly. I can live with that, Austin said. He kissed her again, softer this time. You should go back to the house before the hands wake up and find you here. Laura didn't want to leave, but she knew he was right. She kissed him one more time and then slipped back across the yard, her heart lighter than it had been in months despite the threat hanging over them. The next few weeks were tense. They watched constantly for signs of sabotage or interference from Brennan, but nothing happened. The fence line remained intact, no cattle went missing, and no mysterious accidents occurred. Either Brennan had backed down, or he was planning something bigger. Austin doubled down on preparing for the fall cattle sale. He worked with Billy and Sam to identify the best market-ready steers, making sure they were in peak condition. He sent telegrams to cattle buyers in Kansas City and Chicago, getting price quotes and negotiating terms. He planned the drive to the railroad with military precision. By early September, they were ready. The plan was to drive 200 head to the railroad depot in Santa Rosa, where they would be loaded onto cattle cars and shipped to the Kansas City stockyards. If Austin's calculations were correct, the sale would bring in enough money to make the mortgage payment, rebuild their emergency reserves, and start purchasing new breeding stock to replace what they had sold earlier in the year. The drive was scheduled for the second week of September. The night before they were set to leave, Laura made a special dinner for everyone. The mood around the table was optimistic but nervous. Everything hinged on this sale. After dinner, Austin asked to speak with Laura privately. They walked out toward the barn, ostensibly to check on the horses but really just to have a moment alone. "I want you to come with us tomorrow," Austin said. Laura was surprised. "To the cattle drive. I've never been on a drive." "I know, but I want you to see this part of the operation. And selfishly, I want you there when we complete the sale. We started this partnership together. I want us to finish this part together." Laura thought about it. Leaving the ranch house empty felt strange, but Juan was staying behind to watch over the property, and it was only for 2 days. The idea of seeing the culmination of their hard work, of being present for the sale that would determine their future, appealed to her. "All right," she said. "I'll come." Austin's smile was brilliant. "Good. I'll feel better having you close anyway. Brennan's been too quiet. I don't trust it." The drive the next day was challenging but not disastrous. The cattle, well fed and healthy, moved steadily. Billy and Sam rode point, keeping the herd together and moving in the right direction. Austin and Laura rode alongside, watching for problems. They made good time and arrived at the railroad depot by late afternoon. The cattle buyer, a shrewd man named Harrington from Kansas City, was waiting. He inspected the herd carefully, checking their condition and weight. Laura watched nervously as Harrington conferred with his assistant, making notes and calculations. Finally, he approached Austin with an offer. The number was lower than what Austin had hoped for, but higher than what Laura had feared. It was enough. They would make the mortgage payment and have a modest cushion. Austin glanced at Laura and she nodded. "We'll take it," Austin said. They shook hands, and just like that, months of work and worry crystallized into a check that Laura tucked carefully into her bag. They supervised the loading of the cattle onto the train cars, making sure the animals were treated properly. By the time everything was finished, the sun was setting. "There's a hotel in town," Austin said. "We should stay the night and head back in the morning. The horses need rest, and so do we." Laura agreed. They secured rooms at the modest hotel, had dinner at the restaurant next door, and retired early. Laura lay in her unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the town outside her window. For the first time in months, maybe for the first time since James died, she felt genuinely hopeful about the future. The next morning, they started the journey back to the ranch. They were about halfway home when they saw the smoke. A dark column rose from the direction of Laura's property, thick and black against the bright blue sky. Laura's heart dropped into her stomach. "No," she breathed. Austin spurred his horse forward and Laura followed, Billy and Sam close behind. They rode hard, fear driving them faster than was safe across the rough terrain. As they crested the final hill overlooking the ranch, the scope of the disaster became clear. The barn was on fire, flames leaping high into the air. The house appeared intact, but the barn was fully engulfed. They raced into the yard to find Juan and two men from the neighboring small ranch fighting the fire with buckets of water from the trough. It was hopeless. The barn was too far gone to save. Austin immediately began organizing the efforts to protect the house and the other outbuildings. They couldn't save the barn, but they could keep the fire from spreading. Laura joined the bucket brigade, working frantically despite the heat and smoke. It took hours, but they finally got the fire under control. The barn was a total loss, reduced to a smoking shell of charred timber. But the house was safe, and miraculously, all the horses had been in the pasture and were unharmed. Juan, his face streaked with soot and exhaustion, reported what had happened. "I was checking the fence line on the southern border when I saw the smoke. By the time I rode back, the fire was too big to stop. I rode to the Morris Ranch and got help, but it was too late." "How did it start?" Austin asked, though Laura could tell from his expression that he already suspected. Juan's face was grim. "I found this before the fire destroyed everything." He held up a half-burned lantern. "This was in the hay loft. Someone left it there deliberately." "Brennan," Laura said, her voice shaking with fury and despair. "We don't know that for certain," Austin said, but his clenched jaw betrayed his own anger. "Who else?" Laura demanded. "He threatened us. He said accidents happen. This is exactly what he meant." Austin put his hand on her shoulder. "Even if we're right, we can't prove it, and going after him without proof will just make things worse." Laura wanted to scream, to saddle her horse and ride to Brennan's ranch and demand justice. But she knew Austin was right. Without proof, any accusations would be dismissed as the hysterics of an overwrought widow. That night, as they surveyed the damage by lantern light, the full impact hit Laura. The barn had held not just hay and equipment, but also months of work and investment. Tools, tack, stored grain for the winter, everything was gone. The financial loss was staggering. The check from the cattle sale that had seemed like salvation that morning now looked barely adequate to cover the damage. Laura sat on the porch steps, her head in her hands, feeling the weight of it all crushing down on her. Everything she had fought for, everything she and Austin had worked so hard to build, wiped out in an afternoon. Austin sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. He didn't say anything, just sat with her in the darkness. "I can't do this anymore," Laura said finally, her voice breaking. "I can't keep fighting. Maybe Brennan is right. Maybe I should just sell and be done with it." "You don't mean that," Austin said quietly. "Don't I? Look at what it's cost me. James is dead. Now the barn is gone. How much more am I supposed to lose before I admit defeat?" Austin turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Laura, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his. "You are the strongest person I have ever met," Austin said. "You have faced down every obstacle this land and this life could throw at you. A fire is a setback, yes, a bad one, but it's not defeat unless you let it be. We can rebuild. It won't be easy, but we can do it together." "With what money?" Laura asked bitterly. The cattle sale was supposed to save us, and now it won't even cover replacing what we lost. Then we adapt. We rebuild slowly. We prioritize. We do what we've been doing all along. We survive and we keep moving forward. And Laura, you won't be doing it alone. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I love you and I believe in you and I believe in this ranch. Please don't give up now. Laura felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She was so tired of being strong, so tired of fighting. But looking into Austin's face, seeing the absolute faith and determination there, she found a tiny spark of resilience she thought had been extinguished. "All right," she whispered. "We keep fighting." Austin pulled her into his arms, and she let herself lean on him, drawing strength from his solid presence. The next morning, they took stock of what remained and what they needed. The immediate priority was shelter for hay and equipment as winter approached. They couldn't afford to rebuild the barn properly, but they could construct a simple pole barn that would serve the basic needs. Austin, Billy, and Sam began work on the structure while Laura went into town to order materials and, reluctantly, to speak with the banker about extending credit. To her surprise, Garrison, the banker who had been pressuring her to sell, was sympathetic. "I heard about the fire," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Bad luck, that." "Yes," Laura said neutrally, not mentioning her suspicions about Brennan. "I'll give you an extension on the next mortgage payment," Garrison said. 3 months instead of 6 before it's due. And I'll extend a small line of credit for rebuilding materials. But Laura, I have to be honest with you. This ranch is becoming a bad risk. If you can't make that payment in 3 months, the bank will have to foreclose. Laura swallowed her pride. "I understand. Thank you for the extension." As she left the bank, she nearly collided with Thomas Brennan on the sidewalk. He tipped his hat to her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Ashford, I heard about your misfortune. Terrible thing, a fire. You really should consider my offer before something else goes wrong." Laura looked him directly in the eye. "I know you set that fire." Brennan's smile widened. "That's a serious accusation. You have any proof?" "Not yet." "But I will, and when I do, I'll see you hang for it. Careful, widow, making threats can get you in trouble." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "You can't win this. You're one woman with a hired hand and 3 cowhands. I have money, influence, and patience. Sooner or later you'll break. Save yourself the pain and sell to me now." "Go to hell," Laura said clearly. She pushed past him and walked to the general store, her hands shaking with rage. Mrs. Chen, the store owner, took one look at her face and ushered her into the back room. "Sit, Mrs. Chen commanded, pressing a cup of tea into Laura's hands. "Breathe." Laura told her about the fire, about Brennan's veiled threats, and the banker's ultimatum. Mrs. Chen listened, her weathered face thoughtful. "This man Brennan, he is a snake," Mrs. Chen said, "but he is also a coward. He hides behind others, makes others do his dirty work. You need to find who set the fire. Someone will talk if you ask the right questions." "Who would talk to me? I'm a widow with no power." "But your foreman, this Austin, he has friends among the ranch hands in the area, yes. Men talk to other men. Someone knows something." It was a slim hope, but it was something. Laura thanked Mrs. Chen and bought the supplies she needed on credit, then headed back to the ranch. Over the next few weeks, Austin quietly put out feelers among the network of ranch hands and drifters who moved through the area. He bought drinks at the saloon in town, played cards, and listened more than he talked. Meanwhile, they worked on rebuilding, constructing the pole barn and slowly replacing the lost equipment with cheaper alternatives. The break came from an unexpected source. A young drifter named Pete showed up at the ranch looking for work. Austin hired him for a few days to help with the building, and on his 3rd evening, Pete sought Austin out privately. "I heard you were asking about the fire," Pete said, nervous but determined. I might know something. Austin brought him to Laura and Pete told his story. He had been working for Brennan up until a week ago. He had overheard Brennan talking with his foreman about the fire, laughing about how the widow would have to sell now. Brennan hadn't set the fire himself, but he had paid 2 men, drifters who had since left the area, to do it. "Why are you telling us this?" Laura asked. Pete shuffled his feet. "My ma was a widow. She lost her place because men like Brennan pushed her around and nobody helped. I don't want to be part of that. It ain't right." "Would you testify to what you heard?" Austin asked. Pete hesitated. "If I do that, I'll never work in this area again. Brennan will make sure of it." "What if we helped you relocate?" Laura suggested. "We can't pay you much, but we could give you enough to get to California or Oregon, make a new start." Pete thought about it and nodded slowly. "All right. I'll testify." Armed with Pete's testimony, Austin and Laura went to the sheriff. As expected, the sheriff, who was in Brennan's pocket, was dismissive. "Hearsay from a drifter," the sheriff scoffed. "That won't stand up in court." "Then we'll take it to the territorial marshal," Austin said. "And to the newspaper. Whether it stands up in court or not, people will know what Brennan did. His reputation will be mud." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You're playing a dangerous game." "We're not playing," Laura said. "We're fighting for what's ours." They went to the newspaper office and told their story to the editor, a crusty old man named Horace Milburn who had been running the Santa Rosa paper for 20 years. Milburn listened, asked sharp questions, and finally nodded. "I'll print it. Brennan will sue me for libel, probably, but I never liked that bastard anyway. And if your boy Pete will go on record, I've got enough to defend against a lawsuit." The story ran in the next edition of the paper. The headline read, "Local rancher accused of arson against widow." Pete's testimony was quoted extensively, and while the article was careful to present it as an allegation rather than proven fact, the implication was clear. The reaction in town was immediate. Public opinion turned sharply against Brennan. The Ladies' Church group, which had significant social influence, openly condemned him. Other ranchers who had been neutral began speaking out against his tactics. Even Garrison at the bank, sensitive to public opinion, made it known that the bank did not approve of such methods. Brennan tried to fight back, threatening lawsuits and denials, but the damage was done. Within a week, he appeared at Laura's ranch, his face red with anger but also something that looked like defeat. Austin met him at the property line, Laura standing beside him. "You've ruined me," Brennan said without preamble. "The bank is calling in my loans. Buyers won't work with me. My own hands are quitting." "You ruined yourself," Austin said coldly. "We just made sure people knew what you did. What do you want? Money?" "I'll pay for the barn. Is that what this is about?" Laura stepped forward. "I want a signed confession. I want you to admit publicly that you hired those men to burn my barn, and I want enough money to rebuild it properly. Then I want you to stay away from me and my property for the rest of your life." Brennan looked like he wanted to argue, but he must have seen the determination in their faces. He was cornered and he knew it. "Fine. I'll sign your confession and pay for the barn, but then we're done. You never speak of this again." "Agreed," Laura said. 3 days later, in the presence of the newspaper editor and the territorial marshal who had been called in to investigate, Brennan signed a confession and handed over a check for the full cost of rebuilding the barn. The marshal arrested him on arson charges, and while Brennan's lawyer eventually got the charges reduced to a fine and probation, his reputation was destroyed. Within 6 months, he sold his ranch and left the territory entirely. With Brennan's money, they rebuilt the barn bigger and better than before. They hired 2 additional hands, bringing the ranch up to proper staffing levels. The fall and winter passed smoothly, and when spring came, they had their best calving season in years. By late spring, a full year after James's death and 8 months after Austin had first ridden onto her property, Laura felt ready to move forward publicly with their relationship. They announced their engagement in May, and despite some raised eyebrows about the timing, most people in Santa Rosa were supportive. Mrs. Chen threw an engagement party at the general store, and even Garrison offered his congratulations. They were married in June in the small church where Laura had married James 9 years earlier. It felt right to Laura, a continuation rather than a replacement. She wore a simple blue dress rather than white, and Austin wore his best suit. Juan served as Austin's best man, and Mrs. Chen stood up with Laura. The wedding was small and simple, but it was filled with genuine warmth and happiness. As Laura spoke her vows, looking into Austin's eyes, she felt James's presence not as a ghost or a source of guilt, but as a blessing. James had loved her, and because he had loved her, he would have wanted her to be happy. Austin made her happy. After the wedding, they held a barbecue at the ranch. All the hands attended, along with neighbors and friends from town. As the sun set and people danced to the music of a fiddle player, Laura stood with Austin's arm around her waist and felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "Happy," Austin murmured in her ear. "More than I ever thought I'd be again," Laura admitted. Over the next 2 years, the ranch prospered. With Austin's management and Laura's financial acumen, they not only cleared the mortgage but began buying additional land. They increased the herd, improved the breeding program, and built a reputation for producing quality cattle. In the fall of their 2nd year of marriage, Laura discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complicated mix of joy and grief. She had wanted children with James, but it had never happened. Now she would have a child with Austin, and while she was thrilled, she also felt a pang of sadness that James would never know this joy. Austin, sensing her mixed emotions, held her close. "It's okay to feel everything you're feeling. Joy and sadness can exist together. James was part of your life, and he always will be. But this baby, our baby, is part of our future. And I think that's something worth celebrating." Their son was born in early summer, a healthy baby with Austin's gray eyes and Laura's dark hair. They named him James Austin Zimmerman, honoring both the past and the present. Holding her son for the first time, Laura felt the final piece of her grief settle into place. She would always miss James, always carry him in her heart, but she was no longer defined by loss. She was defined by love, by family, by the life she and Austin were building together. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Emma Rose, who had her father's smile and her mother's stubborn determination. The ranch house that had felt so empty after James died now rang with the sounds of children playing, hands working, and life being lived to its fullest. On a warm evening in late summer, 7 years after Austin had first ridden onto her property, Laura stood on the porch watching her children play in the yard. James, now 5, was teaching his little sister how to skip stones in the trough, both of them laughing when the stones sank instead of skipped. Austin came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "How different my life is from what I thought it would be," Laura said. "How much I've lost and how much I've gained." "Any regrets?" Laura turned in his arms to face him. "Not a single one. James gave me a foundation, you gave me a future. I'm grateful for both." Austin kissed her softly. "I'm grateful you took a chance on a cowboy with nothing but a horse and a crazy idea." "Best gamble I ever made," Laura said with a smile. Juan called from the barn that one of the mares was about to foal, and Austin reluctantly released Laura to go help. She watched him jog across the yard, stopping to ruffle James's hair and kiss Emma's head before disappearing into the barn. The sun was setting, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of gold and crimson. The cattle were settled in the pastures, the horses were content in the corral, and the ranch that had nearly been lost was now thriving. Laura had refused to sell when everyone told her to, had held on when holding on seemed impossible, and had opened her heart when she thought it was too broken to love again. She called the children in for dinner, listening to their chattering voices as they washed up. Austin returned from the barn with news that the mare had delivered a healthy colt. They sat down to dinner together, the family they had built and the life they had created, and Laura knew that every struggle, every setback, every moment of doubt had been worth it to arrive at this moment of perfect, ordinary happiness. Years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of family. They added more land, expanded the herd, and built a reputation that extended beyond Guadalupe County. Young men sought work at the Zimmerman Ranch, knowing they would learn from the best. Buyers sought their cattle, knowing they would get quality. James grew into a tall, serious boy who loved the ranch as much as his parents did. Emma became a fearless rider who could sit a horse before she could properly walk. When James was 8 and Emma was 6, they welcomed another son, Thomas, and 2 years after that, twin daughters, Sarah and Catherine. The ranch house expanded to accommodate the growing family, and the bunkhouse was rebuilt to house the 8 full-time hands they now employed. Juan, now in his 60s, finally retired from active ranch work, but stayed on as an advisor and a beloved honorary grandfather to Laura and Austin's children. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Austin surprised Laura with a gift. He led her out to the southern pasture where a new structure stood, a beautiful gazebo overlooking the creek. "I know you've always wanted a proper garden," Austin said. "I thought this could be the centerpiece, a place for you to sit and read or just think, somewhere that's yours." Laura was overwhelmed. In the chaos of running the ranch and raising 5 children, she had long ago set aside her dream of having a flower garden like her mother had kept. The fact that Austin had remembered and made it a reality touched her deeply. "It's perfect," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You're perfect." "Not perfect," Austin said, pulling her close. "Just a man who loves you more than anything in this world." They stood together in the gazebo, looking out at the land they had fought for and built together. The ranch that Laura had refused to sell, that Austin had offered to run with her, had become more than either of them had dreamed. It was a legacy, a home, a testament to the power of partnership and love. As the sun set on another day, Laura reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been a widow facing impossible odds, alone and overwhelmed. Austin had been a drifter looking for a place to belong. Together, they had built something extraordinary, not just a successful ranch, but a family, a community, a life rich in love and purpose. The children ran up from the house, calling for their parents to come see the new kittens in the barn. Austin and Laura walked hand in hand back toward the house, their children dancing around them, and Laura knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The ranch would continue for generations, a place where hard work met opportunity, where love conquered adversity, and where a widow's stubborn refusal to give up became the foundation for a legacy that would endure. And it had all started with a cowboy who offered to run it with her, who saw potential where others saw only problems, and who loved her enough to fight for their shared dream. As they reached the house, Laura turned for one last look at the land spread out before her. The cattle grazed peacefully, the horses dozed in the corral, and the setting sun painted everything in golden light. The Zimmerman Ranch, born from grief and determination, nurtured by love and partnership, stood as proof that endings could become beginnings, that loss could transform into hope, and that sometimes the most unexpected partnerships created the most enduring legacies. Laura squeezed Austin's hand, and he smiled down at her with the same warmth and devotion he had shown since that first day. Their children's laughter filled the air as they all went inside for dinner, a family complete and a future bright with possibility. The Wild West could be harsh and unforgiving, but it could also be a place where dreams took root and love flourished against all odds. Laura and Austin had proven that, and their story would be told for generations in Santa Rosa. A tale of courage, partnership, and the enduring power of love.